There is a moment in a preliminary hearing when a person realizes the room has already decided. It doesn't come from the gavel. It doesn't come from raised voices. There were no raised voices that morning. It comes from a pause. The hearing officer stopped reviewing the third tab of my binder, set her pen down flat on the desk, and looked at Derek Millhouse, the way you look at a drain that's finally cleared. Derek was sitting 8 feet from me. I didn't look at him when that happened. I didn't need to. Let me back up. Welcome to real-life verdict. Get comfortable. The people in this story had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. My name is Howard. I am 64 years old. I own a 2004 Dodge Dakota with 187,000 miles on it, and a toolbox in the bed that still smells like acetone no matter what I do. I ran a protective coatings company for 38 years. Industrial work, municipal contracts, commercial buildings, the kind of jobs where if you cut a corner, you find out about it in 5 years when a bridge support starts pitting through. You learn not to cut corners. You learn to write things down. I retired 14 months ago. Sold the client list and the active contracts to my business partner of 6 years, Derek Millhouse. Kept the equipment. Kept the LLC. Meridian Protective Coatings, LLC. Still active, still mine. We had talked about a lease arrangement for the machinery, or maybe a buyout. Nothing formalized yet. I told Derek we'd sort it out. He said that worked for him. We shook hands in the parking lot of the office we'd shared for 6 years, and I drove home. I serve as volunteer treasurer for the County Historical Society. $23,000 annual budget. I reconcile every receipt. I file their nonprofit paperwork every March. I mention this not to impress you, but because it tells you something about how I spend my retirement and what kind of attention I pay to numbers. I live alone, 2 miles outside of town, in a house I bought in 1987. I have a son. He's 41, lives 4 states away, works in IT, calls once a month. We have a good relationship. He knew I sold the business. He didn't know the details of what came after. Derek Millhouse. I want to describe him to you accurately. He is a good salesman. Not in the slick sense, in the genuine sense. He listens when clients talk. He remembers their kids' names. He drove 2 hours once to apologize in person to a city facilities manager over a scheduling mistake that wasn't even Derek's fault, and he saved the contract because of it. For 6 years I watched him work and I trusted him, which is not something I hand out casually. There was one thing I always noticed about Derek. Everywhere he went, the office, his truck, the break room, he would open cabinet doors, drawers, the refrigerator, the storage locker, and he would walk away without closing them. Every time. I'd come in behind him and close things. Never said anything about it. It was a small thing. I want to tell you when I first thought about that habit in a different way. But we're not there yet. March 20th was a Tuesday. I know because Tuesdays and Fridays are when I check the shared email account, Meridian Coatings, the old administrative address Derek and I had used for vendor correspondence during the transition. Most of it by March was routine, a parts supplier asking about an open purchase order, a municipal contact confirming a job was closed to satisfaction. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop, and I was looking for a vendor question about a compressor filter I'd agreed to help route. I found something else. The grant portal had sent an auto-confirmation to the shared account. Derek had applied through that portal and listed the shared address as the contact email, possibly without thinking, possibly because it was the address associated with the equipment history he'd been accessing. The confirmation email had a PDF attachment. I opened it. I read it once. Then I set down my coffee cup and read it again. The application was for a state-issued clean energy retrofit grant. The listed grant amount was $180,000. The listed business entity was Derek's new company, registered 5 months earlier, a separate LLC from mine. And attached to the application, in a neatly formatted asset inventory that I recognized immediately because I had built the original template myself, were the serial numbers of my equipment. Every unit. The HVLP guns. the airless sprayers, the 2 mobile compressor units, the gantry crane I'd bought in 2003 for $12,800 that was still sitting in my garage, the scaffolding rig, all of it listed as owned assets of Derek's business. I did not call Derek. I did not call anyone. I saved the email and the attachment to a folder on my desktop, and I named the folder Meridian Admin. Then I finished my coffee. The cup made a small sound when I set it in the sink. I had one thing to check before I made any decisions. Actually, I had several things. But I needed to think about the order. I drove to Paul Henning's house the next morning without calling first. Paul is 61. He's a retired postal inspector. He sells eggs at the farmer's market on Saturdays out of an old tackle box he uses as a cash register. He has backyard chickens and a very good memory for how fraud investigations work. I told him what I had found. He asked 2 questions: whether the grant funds had already been dispersed and whether I had documentation of equipment ownership. I told him the funds were scheduled to disperse in 9 days and that every serial number Derek had listed was in my purchase records. Paul leaned against his truck, a 1996 F-250 he rebuilt himself, and he looked at me for a moment. He said, "If you got the serial numbers and the receipts, this isn't a fight. It's just math." I thanked him and drove home. I want you to understand something about Paul. He did not ask me if I was sure. He did not ask me whether Derek and I could work this out quietly. He did not suggest I sleep on it or wait to see if Derek reached out first. He just answered my question and offered to help me build the submission. No conditions. No hesitation. I noticed that. That afternoon I went to my garage and retrieved the file box. Purchase receipts, loan records, the original LLC operating agreement. I spread them on the kitchen table and I went through the asset inventory in Derek's application line by line. Every serial number matched. Everyone. Purchase dates ranging from 2001 to 2018. All recorded. All in my name, or rather, in the LLC's name. That was when I understood that Angela had been in the shared drive. Derek's wife. She's a paralegal, experienced with filings and applications, and she had prepared the submission. She would have needed those serial numbers to fill out the inventory section. They didn't come from memory. They came from files Howard's company had maintained, and Derek still had access to. I thought about a thing I had heard once, secondhand. The kind of thing you hear when people think you're not paying attention anymore. I filed it away. I wasn't ready to use it yet. I want to stay with you here for a moment because this is where everything I thought I understood about the previous 6 years started to rearrange itself. I had assumed Derek and I parted on professional terms. With loose ends we would tie up over time. That is what I believed on the drive home from that parking lot handshake. I believed it through the fall and the winter. What I started to understand on March 21st is that Derek had not left any loose ends open. He had simply left the drawers open and walked away, assuming no one would come in behind him to check. I kept thinking about that and I kept writing things down. March 22nd, County Clerk's Office. I pulled the official registration for Derek's new entity and the standing records for my LLC. Made certified copies. What those documents showed was simple. My LLC was active, in good standing, and the equipment had never been transferred to Derek's business by any documented instrument. They were different legal entities. The equipment belonged to one and not the other, and a grant application had just certified the opposite under penalty of perjury. That last part, I didn't fully understand the weight of it until the next morning. March 23rd. I drove to the public library. I used their computer terminal to access the state grant portal and download the application guidelines. I had printed the relevant section when I found what I was looking for. Applicants were required to certify, under penalty of perjury, that they owned the assets listed in the inventory. Derek had signed that certification. I sat at the library terminal for a moment with that sentence in front of me. I had been wondering still whether there was some angle I wasn't seeing. Some prior conversation where Derek believed we had agreed to something I didn't remember agreeing to. I am 64 years old and I have spent my life trying to be fair about what I know and what I don't know. But I had one thing Derek hadn't accounted for. Something he had no way of knowing was still in place. And when I sat at that library terminal and read that perjury certification, I made a decision. Not because I wanted to. Because the math was what it was. That afternoon I sat down at my kitchen table and drafted a 2-page cover letter to the State Fraud Department. I attached 12 documents. I sent the submission from my personal email account, not the shared one which I was preserving as evidence. I included my phone number. I offered to provide additional records if needed. Once I sent it, there was no quiet resolution. I knew that when I clicked send. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone with access to something, an account, a record, a reputation, and discovered later that they had been watching you stop paying attention? That they had been waiting for you to look the other way? If that's happened to you, drop it in the comments. I'll be reading. And if you're not subscribed yet, do that now because we're about to get to the part where the math comes due. Let's keep going. March 30th, my living room. The phone rang at 10:15 in the morning. It was an investigator from the State Fraud Department calling to confirm they had opened a case. The grant funds were frozen pending review. She asked me 3 questions about the LLC's current standing. She thanked me for the quality of the documentation. I wrote down her name and the case number on the notepad I keep next to the phone. I said thank you, and I hung up. Derek did not know yet. The funds were frozen. He just didn't know why. April 5th, midday. The investigator called again. Derek had been notified of the fraud allegation. A preliminary hearing was scheduled for April 11th. She told me I was not required to attend, but that I could if I chose. I said I would attend. I did not hear from Derek. Not that afternoon. Not the following day. Not the day after that. April 8th. I stopped by Ernesto Campos's shop to ask about borrowing his gantry crane for a small side job. Ernesto is 58 years old. He rebuilt his truck himself. He keeps a laminated photo of his granddaughter on the dashboard next to the inspection sticker. He had heard from someone in the contractor network that Derek's grant had been flagged. He looked at me and asked if everything was all right. I said it was handled and asked about Tuesday. Ernesto said, "You need the gantry crane Tuesday? It's yours. Don't care what for." That was the whole conversation. April 10th. Paul's kitchen. He went through my evidence binder. I had tabbed it. Chronological order. Serial numbers highlighted in yellow. He closed it when he was done. He told me the only argument Derek could make was that the equipment use had been authorized. I told Paul there was no document in existence that authorized Derek to claim my equipment as his own to a state grant agency. Paul nodded. He said the hearing would probably be procedural. He said unless Derek tried something. I thanked him and drove home. I set the binder on the kitchen table, and I went to bed at 9:30. Now, here is what Derek didn't know. When I retired, I kept the shared administrative email account active. Twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays, I checked it. For vendor questions, for transition correspondence, for the ordinary business of winding down 38 years of operation in an orderly way. Derek knew the account existed. What he didn't know, what he had no reason to know because he believed I had checked out, was that I was still in it. And I kept equipment manifests. Not rough notes. Actual manifests, organized by unit, each one carrying the serial number, the purchase date, the acquisition cost, and the loan instrument, if applicable. Records precise enough to match, line for line, every asset listed in his application. Angela had said, preparing that application, "They process 100 of these a month, Derek. Nobody's calling Howard." She wasn't wrong about the volume. She was wrong about the volume. She was wrong about Howard. The grant portal had auto-copied the confirmation email to the address in the application file. The shared address, the one I checked on Tuesdays and Fridays, that is what Derek left open when he walked away. He opened the account and he walked away from it and he didn't close it. Just like every drawer, every cabinet, every door, his whole professional life. I'm not saying this to be cruel, I'm saying it because it matters that it wasn't complicated. It wasn't a trap I laid. It wasn't surveillance. It was a Tuesday. It was coffee, and a laptop, and a Tuesday, April 11th. County Courthouse, 3rd floor. The hearing room has wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lights and 4 rows of benches that were empty the entire morning except for us, a court reporter in the corner, the hearing officer, a state attorney from the fraud division, at the raised bench. Derek and Angela sat at one table. I sat at the other. My binder in front of me closed. The hearing officer opened the session. She asked me to summarize my claim. I opened the binder to the first tab. I told her that on March 20th, I discovered, through the shared administrative email account associated with my LLC, that a grant application had been submitted by Derek Millhouse's business entity listing equipment owned by Meridian Protective Coatings, LLC, as owned assets of his separate company. I told her the equipment had never been transferred by any documented instrument. I walked her through the second tab, the LLC filings certified from the county clerk. I walked her through the third tab, the equipment manifest, 12 units, every serial number matching the grant application's asset inventory. I did not editorialize. I did not address Derek. When she asked if I was seeking restitution beyond the denied grant, I said no. I said I wanted the record clear. She looked at the binder for a while. That was when she set her pen down flat. She denied the grant. She referred the matter to the State Attorney General's office for review of potential criminal fraud charges and noted on the record that the application had contained falsified asset information. She named Angela as the preparer in the referral. I closed the binder. I thought about a thing I had heard once. Second hand. Thought about the parking lot handshake. The 6 years. The client whose name Derek remembered. The 2-hour apology drive. I thought about all of it for approximately 2 seconds. Then I nodded to the hearing officer, stood up, and walked out. I did not look at Derek or Angela when I left, but I know what a room sounds like when everything leaves a person's face at once, even without looking. The quality of the silence changes. His own words, applied back to him with every document they deserved. Howard's not even paying attention anymore. He was wrong about that. The hallway outside the hearing room was quiet. There was a water fountain near the elevator. I stopped and took a drink. The water was cold. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and old paper, the way courthouses always do. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and rode it down to the lobby. I pushed through the front door and stepped outside. April air, morning still in it, the light not quite warm yet. My truck was in the second row of the lot. I unlocked it, put the binder on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. The toolbox in the bed still smells like acetone. Probably always will. I started the engine and drove home.